In the early hours of February 14, 1991, over western Iraq, the cockpit glowed with a wireframe valley, ridges and channels drawn in green, keeping the jet low over terrain the crew could not see. Then a heat plume slid across the Wizzo's screen, broad, hovering, kicking dust. An Mi-24 Hind gunship, too low for radar to track cleanly, too close for any missile to arm. Even earlier F-15s couldn't have touched it. They would have called it in and returned to base. But the brand new F-15E carried technology they never had. With the flick of a switch, the Wizzo keyed the laser and painted the target. Then the pilot eased the nose up, and over the desert, the Strike Eagle lined up with the last weapon a helicopter ever expected to face in midair. For the first time since World War II, American pilots were no longer certain they controlled the skies. Over Vietnam in the late 1960s, the F-4 Phantom II, once a proud symbol of U.S. air power, found itself challenged by smaller, more agile Soviet-built MiGs darting through the clouds above Hanoi. The Phantom had been built to do everything: intercept enemy aircraft, drop bombs, and carry out reconnaissance. However, in trying to do it all, it struggled to do any one job perfectly. Against the nimble MiG-17s and MiG-21s, it lacked agility, visibility, and even a gun. Meanwhile, Soviet surface-to-air missiles filled the skies, forcing U.S. pilots to fight for survival in airspace they once controlled with ease. Determined not to repeat its mistakes, the U.S. Air Force set out to build a new kind of fighter, one designed to win air superiority every time it took off. In 1969, McDonnell Douglas won the Air Force contract to build just that. The concept was simple. It would be a twin-engine jet designed around power, maneuverability, and pilot awareness, rather than the compromises of multi-purpose design. The result was the F-15 Eagle. Twin Pratt & Whitney F-100 engines gave it a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1:1, allowing it to accelerate vertically and reach speeds beyond Mach 2.5. Its revolutionary AN/APG-63 radar could detect multiple targets through ground clutter, while its frameless canopy gave pilots nearly unobstructed visibility. When the YF-15A prototype first took to the air on July 27, 1972, it marked the peak of years of design work and testing under the Air Force's Fighter Experimental, or FX program. The goal was to rebuild America's edge in the air as the Soviet threat continued to grow. By 1974, the first production aircraft were delivered to the 58th Tactical Fighter Training Wing, and by 1976, the Eagle had entered operational service. It quickly proved the value of its single-minded design philosophy, summed up by the program's motto, quote, "Not a pound for air to ground." In combat, the F-15 became the benchmark for modern air superiority. The original Eagle variants, F-15A, C, and D, earned more than 100 confirmed aerial victories without a single loss in air-to-air combat, a record no other fighter has equaled. Yet, as military strategy changed, the Air Force's priorities shifted with it. Future wars would need more than fighters that could win in the air. They would need aircraft that could strike deep, survive intense defenses, and still make it home. Existing strike aircraft, like the F-111 Aardvark, a veteran of Vietnam, could fly low and fast, carry heavy payloads, and slip under radar coverage. Still, it came at a cost. It was expensive to maintain, complex to operate, and lacked the agility and situational awareness of newer fighters entering service. The Air Force wanted a jet that could strike deep like the F-111, but fight like the F-15. It needed range, precision, and survivability, all in one aircraft. Although the F-15 Eagle had been designed purely for air combat, McDonnell Douglas engineers had long suspected it could do more. From the beginning, they had built in structural allowances for heavier loads and the potential for limited ground attack missions. They saw the makings of a multi-role aircraft. In 1978, the Air Force put that idea on paper through the Tactical All-Weather Requirements Study, a broad review of how future wars might be fought. Analysts studied Soviet radar networks, interceptor tactics, and missile defenses, concluding that the next generation of combat aircraft would have to do everything: fly long distances, strike hardened targets with precision, and still hold its own in a dogfight. The study recommended that McDonnell Douglas's concept serve as the basis for America's next strike platform. A year later, McDonnell Douglas and Hughes Aircraft teamed up to develop the Eagle's new air-to-ground systems. The second TF-15A prototype was modified into the Advanced Fighter Capability Demonstrator, which first flew on July 8, 1980. It tested conformal fuel tanks known as fast packs that extended range without drag, and a pave-tack laser pod that let the jet find and destroy targets with pinpoint accuracy. When it appeared at the 1980 Farnborough Air Show, the crowd watched an F-15 sweep low across the field, heavy with bombs and sensors, yet flying like a pure fighter. No aircraft had ever shown that balance of power, range, and agility before. From that proof came the F-15E Strike Eagle, a jet built to fly low, fast, and far, merging the F-111's reach with the Eagle's speed. The prototype had proven that the concept was possible. Before committing to the F-15E, the Air Force briefly explored a foreign alternative. The Pan-Avia Tornado IDS, already serving with Britain, Germany, and Italy, was evaluated during the Tactical All-Weather Requirement Study of 1978-79 as a possible off-the-shelf solution. Its proven low-level strike capability appealed to planners seeking a quick replacement for the aging F-111. However, the Tornado's shorter range, limited payload, and dependence on Allied production chains made it unsuitable for the U.S. deep strike doctrine. Once the Air Force committed to an American design, Brigadier General Ronald W. Yates led a 3-year evaluation under the dual-role fighter program. Engineers and pilots flew hundreds of test sorties in every weather condition, day and night, fully loaded and at maximum speed, pushing the aircraft to its limits while testing radar performance, endurance, and weapons accuracy. Over more than 200 flights, the F-15E proved it could carry 16 different weapon configurations, from precision bombs to long-range missiles, without losing agility or stability. Conformal fuel tanks extended its range, while new radar and terrain-following systems let it weave through valleys in darkness or bad weather. By 1984, the results were clear. The Air Force selected McDonnell Douglas to begin full-scale development of the F-15E Strike Eagle. When the first production model rolled out of McDonnell Douglas's St. Louis plant in December 1986, it looked much like the F-15C that had rolled the skies for a decade. However, under the skin, it was a different aircraft entirely. Built on the proven bones of the F-15, engineers redesigned the structure, avionics, and fuel systems to increase range, payload, and low-altitude performance, transforming the fighter into a true dual-role aircraft capable of dominating both air and ground missions. The airframe was strengthened with thicker spars and titanium reinforcement, giving it the ability to carry more than 23,000 pounds of fuel and ordnance, nearly twice that of its predecessor. New manufacturing techniques, including superplastic forming and diffusion bonding, reduced weight while boosting durability, enabling the jet to endure the violent stresses of low-level, high-speed flight. Twin Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW220 engines delivered over 50,000 pounds of thrust, enough to push the aircraft vertically and sustain Mach 2 speeds, even under heavy load. The most visible change was the addition of conformal fuel tanks, contoured to the fuselage. Each carried roughly 750 gallons of fuel and 6 weapon stations, extending range to nearly 1,000 miles without refueling. Inside the cockpit, the changes were even more striking. The second seat, once used for flight training, was now home to the Weapons Systems Officer, or WISO. Surrounded by screens and controls, the WISO handled radar, navigation, and weapons, allowing the pilot to concentrate on flying and fighting. On December 11, 1986, test pilot Gary Jennings took the jet aloft for its maiden flight, reaching 40,000 feet in Mach 0.9 before returning to base. The flight confirmed what engineers had long pursued, a fighter that could carry the punch of a bomber. Soon after, the Air Force awarded McDonnell Douglas a contract to build 390 aircraft. The first fully equipped F-15E reached Luke Air Force Base in April 1988, ready to train the Strike Eagle's first generation of crews. Its transformation, however, went beyond hardware. Its true evolution was in the systems that made it think. The jet carried an integrated network of sensors, including radar, infrared cameras, inertial navigation, and laser designators, all linked through the cockpit displays. Together, they gave the pilot and WISO the ability to turn total darkness into a detailed tactical picture. At its core was the AN/APG-70 pulse Doppler radar, a system capable of mapping terrain with near photographic clarity. It could lock onto moving ground targets and switch instantly to air-to-air mode to scan for interceptors. The crew could freeze a radar image of a target area, zoom in for detail, and return to live scanning without losing situational awareness. Its look-down, shoot-down capability filtered ground clutter, allowing it to track trucks, missile launchers, and armored convoys moving below. Beneath the engine intakes hung the lantern pods. Low-altitude navigation and targeting infrared for night. The right side AN/AAQ-13 navigation pod contained a terrain-following radar and forward-looking infrared sensor, projecting a live thermal view of the world ahead onto the pilot's heads-up display and the Wizzo's multifunction screens. Linked to the autopilot, the system allowed hands-off flight at treetop height. The aircraft could follow valleys and ridgelines automatically, while the crew focused on threats and targeting. The left side AN/AAQ-14 targeting pod carried a stabilized FLIR, laser designator, and precision tracker. It could identify and lock on to a target from miles away, handing data directly to a laser-guided bomb or the jet's fire control computer. During an attack run, the Wizzo selected a target on the radar map, cued the FLIR for confirmation, and switched back to airscan mode to watch for interceptors while the pilot lined up the approach. Once the laser painted the target, the bomb rode the beam and struck with pinpoint accuracy. By 1989, the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, had become the first fully operational unit. The Strike Eagle's avionics were reliable, its crews seasoned, and its combat tactics fully developed. So when Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990, it was a proven weapon, and one of the first called into action. Ground crews worked under floodlights, checking weapons and fuel lines before giving the final thumbs up. On January 17, 1991, from the flight lines at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and Seab Air Base in Oman, the first waves of F-15Es thundered skyward. Operation Desert Storm had begun. The roar built into a wall of sound as afterburners ignited, casting twin pillars of blue flame across the tarmac. From both bases, formations split north. One streamed from Oman, the other from Saudi Arabia, tracing separate routes into Iraq. The 4th Tactical Fighter Wing trained for this moment for months. Intelligence warned that Iraqi Scud missile batteries were repositioned across western Iraq, capable of striking coalition cities and airfields. The Strike Eagles were ordered to find and destroy them before they could fire. Flying in pairs, the jet slipped into the black expanse above the Gulf before dropping low over the sand. Below them stretched the barren spine of the Arabian Peninsula, consisting of ridgelines, salt flats, and dry riverbeds glowing faintly in the moonlight. At 500 miles per hour, and only a few hundred feet above the ground, visibility meant nothing. The only guide came from the lantern pods, glowing ghostly green as they painted the terrain in infrared. One wrong move, one stray gust, and the mission could end in fire. Each jet carried GBU-10 or GBU-12 Paveway 2 bombs, AIM-9 Sidewinders, and M120 AMRAAMs, plus conformal tanks for the long reach ahead. As they crossed the border, the night came alive with fire. Tracers climbed in red streaks, and missiles arced upward before bursting in blinding flashes. The Strike Eagle stayed low, skimming the ground. Over western Iraq, several crews reported convoys racing through the dunes, believed to be Scud units, but confirmation was impossible in the confusion of the desert night. By mid-February 1991, the Strike Eagle crews at Al-Kaj were running on fumes and repetition. Missions stacked night after night, because as Captain Tim Bennett put it, quote, "We were slightly undermanned in our unit, and if you were a flight leader, you flew a lot." They launched into the dark, climbed through tanker tracks and radio chatter, then pushed north, where Iraq's defenses were still fully awake. The first 2 weeks were a grind of flak, missile warnings, and low-level work that left no room for mistakes. Before dawn on February 14th, an F-15E pair was on a Scud patrol over northwest Iraq when an E-3 Airborne Warning and Control System, or AWACS, broke in with a different warning. Iraqi helicopters were closing on a U.S. Special Forces team deep inside enemy territory. The Strike Eagles turned immediately, dropped through clouds, and accelerated toward the contact. On radar, the group resolved into 5 helicopters moving from west to east. AWACS confirmed the call bluntly, quote, "We don't have any friendlies in the area. Any helicopters you find, you're cleared to shoot." The call came in fast and low, seeing gunfire flicker below as the helicopters stopped to unload troops. The pilot later recalled the run-in, quote, "It was screaming over the ground, doing about 600 knots. The AAA was still coming up pretty thick." Sidewinders were ready, but Bennett chose a weapon no one expected for an air target. Instead of an AIM-9, he set up a toss with a 2,000-pound GBU-10 Paveway 2, betting on timing and his Wizzo's laser hold. The Wizzo held the laser steady, while the jet closed. The bomb came off 4 miles out, the helicopter lifting and accelerating just as it fell. For a moment, the crew thought it had missed. The seeker found the reflected spot, and the screen erupted in a white flash. The Hind disappeared in the blast, and the troop drop halted in a single strike. The wingman rolled in behind to hit survivors on the ground, while other coalition aircraft converged. The Special Forces team later confirmed the victory and emerged alive. It was a unique engagement, becoming the first and only air-to-air victory ever achieved with a laser-guided bomb. Packard 41 stayed on station long enough to strike nearby ground threats, then hauled back across the desert, mission fuel thin, adrenaline still high. By the end of Operation Desert Storm, the F-15E Strike Eagle had flown more than 2,200 sorties, striking hundreds of key targets across Iraq. It suffered no losses to enemy aircraft, though these missions were not without danger. On the night of January 18, 1991, the Strike Eagle from the 336th Tactical Fighter Squadron slipped south toward Basra at low level, riding its terrain-following radar through black sky and ground fire. The target was an oil storage refinery that was heavily defended and ringed with guns. As the jet rolled in, the air around it filled with tracer arcs and flak bursts. The crew stayed committed to the run anyway, pushing through the last seconds needed to put weapons on target. They didn't make it out. Tail number 881689 was torn apart by anti-aircraft artillery in the heart of Iraq's defenses, ending the lives of Major Thomas F. Koritz and Major Donnie R. Holland. That loss landed like a cold splash across the new Strike Eagle community. The F-15E was new to combat, and its crews were learning in real time what Iraq's low-altitude gun belts could do. In the days that followed, tactics tightened fast, and strikes were routed more deliberately. Timing with wild weasel escorts and jammers became mandatory. Altitude profiles were also adjusted, so crews weren't forced into the thickest AAA just to reach a target. And still, 2 nights later, another Strike Eagle pressed deep into western Iraq near Al-Qaim to hit Scud-related sites. This time the threat was greater and more long-range. Major Thomas E. Griffith Jr. and Colonel David W. Eberle's airplane were brought down by an SA-2 guideline. Both ejected and survived several days in the desert before being captured and held as POWs until the war's end. After the Gulf War, Strike Eagle stayed on station over Iraq. Their role shifted from combat missions to constant patrol, enforcing the ceasefire and keeping Iraqi defenses in check. Throughout the 1990s, F-15Es from the 4th Fighter Wing and the 391st Bold Tigers rotated through the Middle East, enforcing the no-fly zones established under Operations Southern Watch and Northern Watch. They flew from Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, maintaining a constant presence over Iraq from Mosul to Basra. Each mission began the same way: take off into the heat, climb through the haze, and settle into patrol altitude above the desert. When an Iraqi SA-2 or SA-3 radar blinked to life, the threat receiver wailed its warning. Crews marked the signal, coordinated through the Combined Air Operations Center, and responded with a precision strike. Minutes later, the radar trace would vanish from the screens. Through hundreds of sorties, the Strike Eagle became a constant reminder to Iraq's defenses that they were always being watched and never beyond reach. By 1999, the aircraft and its crews were called to a new front. When Operation Allied Force began over Serbia and Kosovo, F-15Es from the 48th Fighter Wing at RAF Lakenheath deployed to Aviano Air Base, Italy, joining NATO's air campaign. Their targets were now Serbia's air defenses, bridges, and infrastructure that sustained the conflict. The terrain was unforgiving, pitting them against mountains, valleys, and weather that shifted without warning. In driving rain and clouds, laser-guided bombs struggled to lock on target, forcing crews to rely on radar mapping and experience. Strike Eagles flew 6-hour missions across the Adriatic, through turbulence and tracer fire, hunting mobile missile launchers and command bunkers hidden among the hills. On April 12, 1999, a Strike Eagle crew attacked a railway bridge near Grdelica, a key link in Serbia's transport network. As the jet released its laser-guided bombs, a civilian train unexpectedly crossed the bridge, resulting in a tragic loss of life. The F-15E's video of the strike, showing the crew's split-second realization, became one of the most studied moments of the campaign. By the war's end, analysts credited the F-15E with some of the most effective precision strikes of the campaign. Strike Eagle crews destroyed bridges, radar stations, and power grids through storms, jamming, and darkness, often when other aircraft were grounded. When the towers fell on September 11, 2001, the world changed, and so did the mission of the Strike Eagle. By early October, F-15Es from the 4th Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson and the 391st Bold Tigers from Mountain Home were wheels up, heading east to take the fight to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Over the jagged mountains of Afghanistan, Strike Eagles roared through the thin air. They flew marathon missions from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar to Umreit in Oman and the remote island base of Diego Garcia. The sorties lasted 8 to 10 hours, often spanning multiple refuelings. Operating in near total darkness, Strike Eagles executed precision attacks with a range of munitions, GBU-12s for soft and mobile targets, GBU-24s for hardened bunkers, and the new GPS-guided JDAMs that fell from unseen heights, striking within meters of cave entrances at Tora Bora and beyond. With each strike, they were collapsing the Taliban and Al-Qaeda defenses that had once been thought unreachable. 2 years later, the Strike Eagle led the way again, this time into Iraq. In March 2003, during Operation Iraqi Freedom, F-15Es crossed into Iraqi airspace ahead of the invasion columns, flying from El Udeid and RAF Lakenheath to strike radar sites, power grids, and command centers around Baghdad. Their bombs opened corridors for coalition aircraft and advancing ground forces, cutting Iraq's air defense network to pieces. In the chaos of sandstorms and smoke, F-15E crews hunted Republican Guard armor, striking convoys and fortified positions with laser-guided precision. By 2011, the Strike Eagle was called back into action, this time over Libya. Under Operation Odyssey Dawn, American and NATO aircraft enforced a UN-mandated no-fly zone and dismantled Muammar Gaddafi's air defense network. They flew at medium altitude, above Manpad's range, using Lantern and Sniper XR pods to identify and mark targets through the haze. Laser-guided bombs fell silently from 20,000 feet onto air defense radars that had stood since the Cold War. By dawn, reconnaissance imagery showed black craters where batteries once stood. The no-fly zone was secure. Even so, the Strike Eagle had never existed in a vacuum. Long before its combat debut, other nations were already trying to counter what the U.S. was building. By the mid-1980s, reports of a new variant of the F-15 began circulating through Moscow's defense ministries. Soviet analysts recognized that the Americans were building something beyond an air superiority fighter. At research centers such as TSAGI and Goznias, engineers collected photographs and performance data, modeling the aircraft's radar cross-section and low-altitude flight envelope. Their simulations suggested that this new Eagle, optimized for night and all-weather attack, could slip beneath much of the Warsaw Pact's radar coverage, evading layers of SA-2, SA-5, and SA-10 missile defenses. When the F-15E Strike Eagle entered service in 1988, the Soviet Union took note. Its AN APG-70 radar, capable of switching seamlessly between ground mapping and air combat modes, gave it a level of situational awareness no Soviet aircraft could match. The MiG-29 Fulcrum and Su-27 Flanker rivaled it in agility, but lacked the range, avionics, and endurance to challenge it on deep strike missions. The Strike Eagle's extra fuel tanks, two-person crew, and ability to fight at night made Soviet planners take a hard look at their own designs. Their answer was the Su-34 Fullback, a heavier armored strike jet built from the Su-27's airframe, but meant to go farther and hit harder. Its side-by-side cockpit and precision radar made it the closest counterpart to an F-15E ever built. The Su-35 Flanker E pushed maneuverability and digital flight controls to new limits, but still couldn't match the Strike Eagle's fusion of speed, sensors, and coordination. Alongside it, the Su-35 pushed air superiority performance to new limits. The clash everyone expected between these jets always felt close. Yet for a long while, the real contest played out quietly, in doctrine, sensors, and the systems each side built to counter the other. Wherever the Strike Eagle fought, it kept running into the same opponents: Soviet-built fighters overhead, and Soviet-designed air defenses on the ground. MiGs tried to contest the skies, radar crews powered up for only seconds at a time, and mobile launchers scrambled to relocate before they were spotted. None of it slowed what the F-15E was built to do. While air superiority Eagles cleared the air, the Strike Eagle slipped beneath the fight, pushing through weather, terrain, and jamming to strike targets other jets couldn't reach. Ground crews learned to fear the moment a radar lit up, once and never returned. By 2018, over Syria, American and Russian aircraft often shared the same airspace. F-15Es, Su-30s, and Su-35s circled within range of one another's radars, yet neither side fired. The rivalry that once defined the Cold War had evolved into a contest of discipline and deterrence. The air battle the world expected between the Strike Eagle and the fulcrum or flanker never materialized. But the F-15E didn't need that matchup to show its worth. Its influence became its victory. Every major strike fighter that followed, from Russia's Su-34 to China's JH-16, bore traces of its design philosophy. However, the world didn't stand still, neither could the jet that helped shape it. New threats, new weapons, and new theaters demanded a fighter that could keep evolving long after its rivals disappeared. More than 30 years after its first combat mission, the F-15E Strike Eagle is still out there, cutting through the night. Its shape is familiar, but almost everything inside has been rebuilt for the digital age. The old analog cockpit has vanished, replaced by high-definition displays, threat overlays, and helmet-mounted symbology that blends radar, infrared, and targeting data into a single picture. BAE Systems' digital GPS anti-jam receiver keeps the jet on course, even in the thick of electronic warfare. At the same time, the Sniper XR pod can track vehicles and convoys across entire valleys with remarkable precision. The most important leap, though, is EPAWS, the AN/ALQ-250 Eagle passive-active warning and survivability system. It can sense a radar lock, break it, confuse it, or hide from it in microseconds. With EPAWS, the Strike Eagle has shifted from a night attack workhorse into a fully networked combat aircraft designed to survive in modern high-threat airspace. Today, the Air Force flies just over 220 F-15Es. In 2022, the fleet began receiving DIGAR, digital GPS anti-jamming protection, and soon after, the legacy radar was replaced with the AN/APG-82V1 AESA, the same one used on the new F-15EX. In 2025, EPAWS entered full-rate production under a $650 million contract, with the first upgraded jets arriving at RAF Lakenheath that January. More upgrades are already lined up: improved sniper pods, new wideband radomes, and software to integrate next-generation and hypersonic weapons. Each step pushes the jet deeper into the future, while preserving the rugged reliability that made it legendary. Across 35 years and more than 100,000 combat hours, the F-15E has never been defeated in air-to-air combat. From Iraq to Afghanistan, Libya to Syria, it has outlasted rivals and expectations alike, proving that even after 4 decades, the Eagle still rules the sky.